Hi, I'm Stephen Brandt with Trust Your Supplier. I'm a value engineer. I help companies uncover value and understand from a risk and compliance perspective, how we can help them achieve their regulatory goals. I have a 15 years experience in procurement. Have been with such companies as Coupa, Jagger, and some others in the procure to pay space. I'll move it over to Chad, my colleague.
Yeah, Chad Hill, Chief Revenue Officer at Trust Your Supplier. Been in procurement technology, supply chain technology for going on 17 years now. Have known our guest here, Eric, for 6 or 7 years, I would say, and very excited for the conversation today. Joined Trust Your Supplier to help lead the global go-to-market team and really amplify our mission and what value we're trying to bring to the market and so on and so on. And I think Rapid Ratings plays a huge part in that. So, Eric, looking forward to the conversation. I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. We've been partnering with Trust Your Supplier for, I think, about 5 years now. And I've got about 20 years experience in data risk and compliance. So been at Rapid Rating 7 years. Prior to that, Edgar Online and Donnelly Financial. And so been in the partnership space for a good 20 plus years. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation. I'm on a couple of committees which are fun, best practices at shared assessments, and then also on the board of ISM New York. So we get to see a lot of different situations from, fellow members and clients. So it's great to kind of weigh in on the conversation today.
Great, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining. So I'll just start this off from a financial risk perspective, corporate wise, I'm not as familiar, obviously, from personal finances and doing my own taxes and understanding kind of personal financial risk. I'm very familiar with that. So really want to learn a little bit more from you, Eric, on just this industry. What are some upcoming challenges? I've prepared a few questions here that I'll ask. Obviously, elaborate as you see fit. I know in the last year, 2 years, we've had a couple large banks go under. We've had some other very high-end, noteworthy companies go under or go in Chapter 11 bankruptcy. So just want to get your insights into how companies like ours and how we can use risk ratings from companies such as Rapid Ratings to really help understand our personal financial risk. I guess more from a company perspective, but
Sure.
how we can help those processes.
Yeah, absolutely. So working at Rapid Ratings, it's been really eye-opening in terms of, looking at critical relationships, right, in your supply chain, or I guess third-party risk. Some companies call it third-party risk if it's financial services, supply chain, kind of for those corporates and manufacturing. And so we produce predictive analytics and robust output of analytics to make it really easy for those that can be quite intimidating, right? Financials. So you have to make it really easy for folks to consume. But really insightful, obviously, with COVID, post-COVID last year. I mean, the real dagger in the, so to speak, into these bankruptcies, right? These companies going bankrupt has been the rising interest rates over the last year and a half because of the access to cheap capital drying up, and they've become highly, highly leveraged. And so these smaller to mid-sized companies have gone, more bankrupt. Obviously, some large public companies out there that we've seen, but it's really those middle market companies that are the bellwether of, corporate America. So very interesting unfortunately, to see that happen. But a lot of companies are highly leveraged, and there's more debt coming due in the next 2 to 3 years.
Hmm.
Can you explain a little bit about, so I understand obviously my immediate suppliers, so my uh my strategic suppliers, but how does risk from a secondary or tertiary ones, how does that come into play for my immediate supplier risk?
Yeah. So obviously, I think the best guidance is to really kind of segment those companies between public and private. Look at the segmentation of critical to non-critical, depending on how you define criticality, right? It could be direct, could be indirect, could be the spend, the sole source, dual source. But those companies that are more critical, you want to go deeper on, right? And use most likely financial statements to really understand the metrics behind, you know, everything that they're doing and producing and understand, you know, how leveraged they are. The companies that are less critical, you know, you might do something a little more broad based and kind of look at a quick, you know, maybe it's a score, credit score, or we've got something called health marks, but anyhow, it really is a brew of firmographics and credit, but then aggregated data on companies where we've rated them. That really shows the longer tail, right? And so for supply chain, that's been really important for nth tier mapping to really get a handle on all these companies that you're doing business with and who are they doing business with. So that's more of a kind of an instant score where you can kind of, you know, you don't have to reach out to the supplier. Whereas to get financials from a supplier, we do reach out on the deeper analytic to get those because we really rely on primary source data for that, which is really important.
Yeah, Eric, as you look at the traditional kind of 80/20 rule on strategic suppliers, and you mentioned the tail, you know, within that, there's a lot of privately held companies, not publicly traded companies that are
Right.
going to be facing some of these financial challenges in 2024. You know, one of the things that I find our customers find very valuable with rapid ratings is the monitoring that you find on private companies. So one, from the 80/20 perspective, focusing more on the tail in that 80%, I mean, how are you seeing the financial situation across private and public companies? Is there a differentiation in how the mitigation plans are handled in those type of situations?
Yeah. So we actually we just partnered with a company, Marblegate Asset Management. We lent them some data, and it was really interesting to see, you know, these different trends, you know, coming out of COVID from, you know, 2019 until now. And so, just to give you some flavor, these companies that are private between that 100 million to 700, 150 million in revenue represent that kind of middle market. And so that accounts for about a third of the private sector, you know, GDP. Um, and so really that data was really telling because it showed that um, EBITDA, which is a key measure of earnings, declined 24% for middle market companies. And for public companies, contrastly, it's soared 18%. So it was very interesting to see that dynamic. And that's because under the underlying metric there was financial leverage. And that ratio of debt to EBITDA rose 62% in the middle market. And in stark contrast, it declined 14% among public companies. So, you know, we see a lot of big public companies in the news, right? It's always, you know, the alphabets or the apples, and you know, there's, you know, they're kind of making the consumer feel like, you know, the economy might be picking up again. But, you know, these millions of companies, you know, where, you know, the middle market where you have, you know, 50 million Americans employed, it really shows a different story. So, you know, that was some data again that we lent out to Marblegate, and anonymized it. And so, you know, it's very that 80/20 rule, you know, you really want to hone in on those the relationships that are going to be most critical to you, but you do want to kind of do a wide swath of, you know, maybe that first stroke of understanding who might be risky and then dive deeper, right? Or prioritize the ones you want to go deeper on. So, you know, that's one thing we've been working on with our clients.
So kind of to stay on that trail a little bit, you know, onboarding new suppliers and going through the financial due diligence to understand wants is great and needed in every supplier onboarding process. But the continuous monitoring
Yeah.
as we roll through 2024, how is Rapid Ratings looking at that 80/20 split and continuously monitoring your suppliers for risk? And how then are you seeing the demands change for understanding what that financial risk is going to do from an impact perspective? And how do you guys kind of approach that? I'd love to get some insight on.
Yeah, sure. We did some correlation studies, and so financial really does bleed over into operational risk. We had companies that were trending down financially when we looked at it with data from our clients on quality and delivery. Companies that were weak financially were more than 2 times likely to ship a defective product and more than 2.5 times likely to ship late. So it was very interesting to see that. Um, and so, from a continuous monitoring standpoint, we recommend at least once a year if it's private and it's a critical relationship that we go gather the financials on them. If they're at high risk, when we do the analysis in our analytics show that, especially in the short term, we may um, give guidance where you should have us collect the financials at least twice a year because we do have a predictive analytic that looks forward for those kind of longer tail relationships. That other score kind of updates monthly, so that could be pushed to you in the sense of kind of understanding if we see the barometer changing, then maybe you want to go deeper. So it's a way of prioritizing the ones where you want to go deeper on. If they're less critical, and you've got a swath of companies where they're not as critical, but yet they're in your supply chain or it's your supplier's supplier, and you've got those identified. So you really want to look at that. And then we've had some, last year, the interagency guidance in the US, we had the OCC, the Federal Reserve Bank or Board, FRB, and the FDIC come together for the first time to really revamp and look at the third party risk kind of mantra or, rules of engagement and best practices, really stemming from the OCC's mandate from, years ago. And in there, they really call for looking at audited financial statements. And that's what we really try to focus on with that deeper analytic is the audited financial statements. But again, you're not getting those, some private companies are not doing that. They're not providing it quarterly, but it's semi-annually or annually. But definitely not one and done. You want to do continuous monitoring, and it's ongoing unless that relationship changes or where it is in the life cycle. So maybe in that RFX process, and then when you go to onboard, if that's a lengthy time, you may want to do it again onboarding, and then do it again, on that periodic continuous basis, and that could be every 6 months to a year.
Yeah, it's something I appreciate about the Trust Your Supplier product and our partnership, not only with Rapid Ratings, but the other partnerships throughout our marketplaces, having the ability to
Sure.
customize those call outs to define what you think is continuously monitoring of that supplier and what aspect do you want to continuously monitor. I mean, you brought up the OCC regulations, so being able to comply or prove your compliance with things like that, cross-referencing that with economic or environmental data with financial data is something that we can cross-reference, but the call outs to be able to get that data can be customized as needed to prove, financial stability, cross-referencing deliverables with a scorecard and referencing the overall stability of that supplier, or injecting it into the GRC legal and compliance
Mhm.
aspect of cross-referencing it with something like EcoVadis environmental data, third-party climate change data, and then cross-referencing what is the financial impact. Really the values that we're seeing, the use cases of our system on the back end, the value that they're deriving from our third-party partnerships. So having the ability to define what is continuously monitoring based on the need is something that we've really
Mhm.
enjoyed and our customers really enjoy in the
And
partnership.
then and on what cadence, right? Because
Yeah.
again, you don't want to have too many, um, and hopefully the other providers aren't doing this. I know we're not, but false positives, right? You don't want to have so much noise and then you're like spending all your time chasing everything down. So it's that delicate balance, and that's what makes you guys really unique, is that you can customize it.
Yeah, it's trying to simplify the monitoring process to prevent the critical information at the time that is needed and not
Yeah.
overwhelm the end user with too much information, as you mentioned, that it becomes overwhelming to where you can't effectively derive what action plans should be taking from those notifications that are coming through. So absolutely agree on that point.
Kind of new to third-party risk monitoring in general, the landscape, and I know each company does things slightly different. So can you elaborate on? I know there's quantitative data versus qualitative data. So understanding how, Rapid Ratings is actually getting the data from a financial perspective, how you're validating that information. Just kind of give maybe a elevator pitch of how you guys collect that data, and
Sure.
how you add value to that data for in layman's terms.
Yeah, absolutely. So where we collect the financials on behalf of our clients, we do that through people process technology with a team in Quincy. And so they actually have different um, levels of fluency in different languages, right? So we have someone speaking Mandarin, French, Italian, German, Portuguese. So again, we have global coverage, and it's really around where those suppliers are. And what's really important is that we build that trust with that supplier. Um, and so
I
they
know
know
a
we're
company that has a similar name.
there. You go. I was just going to say, trust your supplier. Well, they trust us where that data is going, meaning which client is consuming it. We don't deal it out like a deck of cards when we primary source that data. And so that feeds into our models. We have 24 models that are industry sector driven, which is very unique and different because we know a pharma company is different than a healthcare, which is different than a bank. And so that makes it very much relevant in terms of the underlying metrics for end users to really understand. And each output and analysis from that model is very easy to read and interpret. And so we have what's called the financial dialogue. That's where it's quantitative, but it's in a automated fashion. So the questions to ask that supplier and to lean in is really important. We're not just a score, but we have analysis, almost like a robo financial analyst would.
Hmm.
And so it's very automated, but yet easy to understand for those that do not come from a financial background, right? We know there's a lot of folks in procurement sourcing that don't come from controller, CFO, or obviously a chartered financial analyst background. So we really try to make it easy with a Cliff Notes version of supporting discussion, questions to ask, what is the topic, and key points to understand.
Great, thank you.
So I don't know if you have additional questions, but one of the things I'd love to get out of a lot of these lunch and learns that we're doing is really get an understanding from your perspective and how you view our world of procurement and supply chain is what are the priorities for 2024 and beyond? Where should we as an industry be shifting and focusing? And then, we're facing all kinds of geopolitical aspects that are coming into 2024. I think globally there's something like 86 elections that are taking place here in the United States. We're facing our very publicized election as well. I know that's a little beyond financial risk, but would love to kind of get your take on forecasting. And, if you want to play the markets a little bit, you can tell us how many rate cuts you think we'll have from the Fed this
Oh
year.
my, yeah. Well, I mean, that's still the wild card is like, are they going to cut and how many? Because, interest rates really, were the death of in terms of, feeding a lot of bankruptcies and the interest rates on the loan payments. And so, inflation's coming down a little bit, but, it's still undecided, right? That's the wild card. I think, everyone's been mentioning AI, of course, out there, and how does that come into play to, in terms of like procurement and like lower tasks and how to automate things like that. But, I think you have to be careful what data you feed into it, and will it help with the mundane tasks of creating an RFP or an RFI or things like that. But in terms of, the mega trends out there, obviously, yeah, geopolitical is very scary across the board out there at home. And so, God forbid if there's wars and things that are happening. And I think that is very important for everyone to keep monitoring, but it's also, really, really making it easy. And I think, every year I get pulled into conversations around, you know, I know it's a widely overused term, but digital transformation projects of what are folks doing out there to really help bring their, um, you know, I'll say their process, but their risk program to the next level. And it's really about having these platform to platforms kind of plug in and talk to each other because, having everything in separate places, having everyone in silos isn't going to help manage all of these different um, issues that are out there, right? You want everyone working together. And so I think that's a huge one that everyone just keeps trying to aspire to. And, I just got off a call with a client and, they were asking about, just the state of the industry and like where do we see things happening in terms of platforms. And I think there's different platforms for different niches, but I think you have to pull it all together. And I think that's what you guys do really well, right? And relying on experts, right? You're not in the business of curating the data, you're putting it all together, but you also you're reaching out and punching out to experts like us, which I think you're making it really easy for people to navigate and with the supplier and the buyer coming together.
Yeah, I think, there's been this change in procurement over the years of going best in class or single platform. And I think the way we view risk and supplier lifecycle management and everything that entails in that, you really do have to take a best in class strategy and pull the third parties that are specializing in financial, cyber, climate, ESG, your PEPs and sanctions information, and regionally and category specific driven.
Exactly.
How are
Yeah.
you looking at this type of information? And it's near impossible for one company to be an expert in all of that. That's where we want to create a community and a network marketplace, if you will, whatever term you use for it, that gives the buyer and supply chain decision makers the ability to continuously monitor and understand what is the correlated impact or possible resolution solution that comes from visualizing that type of data in one central aspect. So can you cross-reference your financial data with the title change information or tornado information? If you have suppliers that are sitting in a hotspot region of the world, can you relate that to what is the holistic impact of risk and not just an isolated box of, okay, what is my financial risk? Now let me punch out, go somewhere else and see what my
It's all
climate risk is. Right?
interconnected.
Yeah, we want to interconnect that and derive what is my solution, what is my outcome, what are my major risk factors that I need to be indicated on, and not just very specific to those verticals, but very specific to the supplier, to the region, to the buyer or category that you're looking at. And that's where we've really enjoyed our partnership with Rapid Ratings, is you guys really do amplify that financial part of it and what we're seeing. And we see a lot of our customers pulling that in, ingesting that data, and then having us cross-reference it on the back end to drive compliance and regulation, visibility and monitoring. So it's been very successful for us.
Thank you. I totally agree. And obviously, it's all about resilience today. So, understanding the way those risks are interconnected, and one risk might help you obviously, throw off an assessment of another risk because you want to see how resilient they're going to be. If they're going to be able to bounce back from something, whatever that something is. And so if they're already risky, obviously from a financial standpoint or cyber standpoint, that doesn't bode well. And but on the flip side, if you're engaging with a supplier and you're growing and they're growing, are they going to keep up with the orders you're giving them? So that's the other flip side, right? It doesn't always have to be about them, obviously chasing the risk, but it's the risk of keeping up if you are relying on them and giving them a lot of orders. How are they going to, step up with that, meeting that demand as
Right.
well?
Are they reinvesting at the rate they should, or are they taking too many
Exactly.
profits off the top
Right.
off the business they
Right.
have? Things you should be monitoring to keep that supplier.
Right. Are they putting it back in the
Yep,
infrastructure? Exactly.
absolutely. Yeah.
Eric, I know also from a technology perspective and some trends that are out there. We hear AI, we hear machine learning, predictive analytics, those types of things. Do you have any tools today, on your side where you can use insights or predictive analytics to help fuel future quarters or what help drive strategy from a risk perspective?
So we've had machine learning for years, right? Our database and rich data. has informed our reports and stats. And so the predictive analytic is really our model, right? And our FHR that pumps out of that model. And so the FHR is that short-term forward-looking score. So in a way, we've had that covered for a number of years. So that's, we feel good about that in terms of the machine learning and the predictive analytics that we've had. It's just, now we're like, hey, we've been doing this for a while and we've got a lot of data and enrichment and reports. So yeah, I think we're good there. And we'll continue to do our best at predicting, these bankruptcies, right? There's been a lot out there. And it's really about giving enough time for our clients to do that mitigation of risk. So, I mean, last year was a lot of conferences and it was good to walk into a conference and an insurance company client had said, hey, you had alerted us a good, 12 to 14 months ahead of time before we got the cease and desist letter from two vendors. So it gave us ample time to put together a risk mitigation strategy. And so that's what you want to hear, right? So that was really good to hear that, getting them out early and helping them find a plan or lean into that supplier and figuring something else out if that's what they need to do. But it's oftentimes, it's too little too late if you're not really being forward looking and predictive in those analytics.
So speaking of conferences, what do you feel like are the ones that, your company, you feel like are very beneficial to you and other people out there that are looking for third-party risk help and understanding the industry and trends and that type of thing?
Yeah, great question. It's definitely there's pockets of communities out there. So on the third-party risk side, like shared assessments or TPRA. On the supply chain side, it's ISM and procurement conferences like SIG. And so there's a lot of different avenues for community. Obviously, I also like going to different partners where they have client events or regional events where clients or prospective clients are with other partners where we can kind of really see and talk to people in person. I think that's what we lacked over COVID, and we were all kind of webinared out, but meeting people in person and talking about what they're instituting is quite helpful, and looking forward to doing more of those this year.
So just on a personal note, do you have any favorite locations? Maybe not just for conferences, but also travel. I'd love to hear
Oh,
just
geez.
some
Yeah.
favorites that you have. I love to travel, so curious.
Sure. I mean, I'm kind of, it's always Orlando, Vegas, or Fort Lauderdale seems like the three in the US. But I personally like going to Miami, and those are fun. Nashville was fun last year. And then of course, maybe in Europe, London is always a nice spot to head to. Yeah.
Great. Awesome.
No, we appreciate the time in this series. We're going to try to make a regular process and get on the phone with you and kind of get your take from rapid ratings of how you guys are viewing the changes in our economy. I think it's going to be rapidly changing before now in June. So maybe the second half of the year, we recap some of the changes that have happened, how we've implemented some mitigation plans on what we're changing. And hopefully it's not as impactful as maybe some of us are a little worried about in 2024.
Right.
I believe in the power of procurement and supply chain, and I think we're just going to keep doing our jobs no matter what happens in the world, and we'll figure it out as we always have. So I'm optimistic on the world. I'm optimistic on what we're going to achieve in 2024. There's always going to be something, right? And I think for us, when it comes to procurement and supply chain, it never stops. You've got to keep the train running,
Right.
and we saw that with COVID. So whatever the challenges ahead, what keeps me optimistic is the people that are in the seats running the supply chain, running the process and negotiation with suppliers and keeping the world going. So I have a lot of positive optimism for
Yeah.
2024.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. Same here. It's like steady as she goes, and then straight ahead.
Yeah,
Just keep what you're doing. That's all you
there will
can
be
do.
waves along the
Yeah.
way for sure.
Yeah.
So
Thanks for
great.
having me.
I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Eric. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Same here. Thanks, guys.